we're going to do today. Very exciting. I don't know if that's true. That's probably not true. We're going to talk about Vonnegut. I want you to know that I feel severely hobbled today by the fact that you guys only read 2 chapters since last time. It's not your fault. It's what I scheduled. But I've taught this book for a couple years, and I had so many people bitch about only having 2 weeks to read the book that I've built in an extra day, an extra class day. Isn't it? It's like 2 weeks you guys got or something like that?
Yeah, it's a lot.
I feel like it's a lot of time, but
You read the book in like a day.
people disagreed with me. People disagreed, and people disagree with you. So I've given you the extra day, okay? Which is fine, but my point is I got to be super careful with what we talk about because we're right in the middle. Like last time we talked about chapter 5. Chapter 5 is kind of big, and it's also kind of a big deal. The end of the book is kind of a big deal just because that's how books work. And we're in the middle today, so I got to be real careful that I don't spoil anything. I don't even know, but like, we're going to tread lightly today. We're going to talk about the book some. I have a couple parts that I want to highlight, just like always. Toward the end of class, we're going to switch gears entirely. We're going to talk about something else. It's a surprise. Okay. To begin with, I just want to ask, and it's fine if not, but I do like to ask. Anybody have any questions, thoughts, concerns at this point? Yes, ma'am.
Well, it's regarding the end of chapter 7.
Okay, well that was a sign, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
When he's talking about the syrup and the spoons,
Mm-hmm.
is he like specifically talking about that, or is he trying to
What are you trying to ask me?
like it just seemed like it was so in depth on that part.
Well, we can talk. I don't always talk about this scene, but it is a really big scene. I would even say, like in a book, and we'll talk about this a little bit next time. I should really probably point this at me. Whatever poor son of a bitch is watching the board. In a book that doesn't have a lot of like cinematic moments, you know what I mean? Like we'll talk about this next time, because you kind of got to read the whole book first. But I think at this point, most of you, when I tell you this book isn't super entertaining, you would tend to agree, right? Again, well, not according to whether you like the book, that's not what I'm saying, but like, if you think about our usual measurement for entertainment, you know, whatever that is for you, this book doesn't necessarily fit into that mold. But that scene is one of the only ones that like, you could see it being shot, like for a movie, right? Coincidentally, they tried to make this into a movie at one point. Did not work. Complete shit show. Because how would you make this into a movie? It's bananas. Anyway, what I think is happening in that scene, we can go to it real quick. Do you have a page number by chance? I can find it. But in the chapter.
I've got a different book than what
Okay, 204 in the big book. What is it in the small book, Peter? Just to help anybody that might have. Yeah, the end of chapter 7.
Page 161.
161? Okay. Man, that is a huge difference in the pages. All right. So, for a little bit of background, they're in Dresden now. They're working in this syrup factory. The syrup is fortified with vitamins. I think he says at one point for like pregnant women, right? A lot of details about the syrup, but basically it's like nutrient rich, okay? And the big deal about that, the only reason I think he goes into detail, is they are nutrient deprived, right? They are POWs in Nazi Germany. They're hungry in like ways that we probably can't really understand, right? And it's a weird kind of torture to be working next to something like that and not allowed to have it, right? Like it's a psychological thing. So there's that. But I think, I would assume the part you're talking about is right after the break on in my book on 204, but again, it's right at the end. There were different wraps on the factory window. So Billy has just stolen syrup, and then diffident raps. I mean, somebody's knocking hard on the window. Derby was out there, having seen all. He wanted some syrup too. So Billy made a lollipop for him. He opened the window. He stuck the lollipop into poor old Derby's gaping mouth. A moment passed, and then Derby burst into tears. Billy closed the window and hid the sticky spoon. Somebody was coming. I want to ask first what your question is, because I mean I have thoughts, but like what about that?
It just said, like, I don't know, it just seemed like they talked about it for like a hot minute.
They do.
Like, I felt like maybe it had some importance because they talked about spoons.
Yeah. Well,
Like, it just was weird.
there are spoons everywhere because it's a secret thing, right? You have to do it really fast, and you gotta hide it, and it's also it's a communal thing. I mean, because this part's kind of gross, but again, you do what you got to do. These are strangers' spoons lying around, right? But you're happy to find one. You're like, oh fuck yeah, I can, you know. So it's like doing each other a solid. You're in it together, so there's a sense of community. I mean, the most dramatic moment in this section is Derby cries when he gets the. What's your reading of that? Why do you guys think he does that?
Well, he hasn't tasted something probably that good in a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, we can push on that some because again, when we think of something good, you're like, man, I like Big Macs or whatever. Like this isn't that, right? This goes further. What is it? What is it when he tastes the syrup here? If we could try to describe, what do you think he's experiencing?
Might be having feelings of, you know, nostalgia, maybe he's remembering when he's
Maybe so.
back at home making pancakes, not in.
Maybe. I mean, you know, we got to be a little bit careful how far down the hypothetical we go, but yeah, like for sure, good feelings. How about just back to a time when he wasn't starving, when he didn't feel terrible? Because if you don't get enough nutrients, enough vitamins, all that jazz, you feel like shit. You don't feel good. And he's been that way for a while, and all that hits him right here, like a lightning bolt, you know, real quick. And he's overcome by it. To me, the clearest way I could try to tie this into some of what we've talked about, he has a very human moment. You know what I'm saying? Like, again, so much of the book is moving really fast and crazy things going on. But right here, we see Derby not as a soldier, not even as a, dude, I don't think. We see him as a person who is in a lot of distress, and for just a second, he's allowed to remember what it's not like to feel that way. You see what I'm saying? And he's emotionally overcome by that. So it tells you, first of all, that he's in a real bad place, mentally and physically, and you know. But here, he's not for just a minute, and that's a really hard thing because you know you're immediately going to go back, right, to the awfulness. So I think that's what it is. And it's, again, I can't underscore enough, it's also the communal aspect. I don't think it's an accident, for instance, that Billy puts the spoon in his mouth. He doesn't do it himself. And then, of course, the spoons are hidden by everybody, so everybody's kind of working together to do this. So it's a shared thing. It's a shared misery that they have, but it's also shared pockets of, I wouldn't call it happiness, but like not misery. You know, but I think it's a human moment, and that's really important. That's a hard thing to define, but we're actually going to talk about one here in a couple minutes as well that maybe will help. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I guess.
I appreciate the like. Well, we are gonna talk about a scene that is somewhat similar, so maybe we'll reconvene after that. That's a good question. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when he's wearing like the silver boots and all that, and like the thing, like why? Like, I don't know. He just looks. I don't know. To me, it just feels like he looks dumb, and he just doesn't care. Like why?
Well, Billy would never care.
Yeah,
You know
but,
that.
I would think that he would care about like what his appearance is. Like I know he doesn't care about much, but like I thought that he would be like want to act hard and stuff like that. Like I'm just confused.
Well, I mean, isn't that kind of Billy to a T, though? He's, if anybody, and I think I heard you correctly, if anybody's not going to act hard, it's going to be Billy. He didn't have that in him, first of all, right?
He's so confusing.
Well, I think what you're saying, he's only confusing because he's so unlike any of us or anybody we know. You know? But I would add to that, and I'm kind of getting to what we're going to talk about next time, so again, I got to be careful here. I don't even know how much of a person Billy is. Right? Like, if you think about, there's like typical ways we would define what it is to be a person. But what you're getting at is what it is to be a person socially. Because we are. We're social creatures, and even those among us who say we don't really care what other people think. I mean, again, I'm closing in on 40. I dress like I did in 6th grade. Like, it's, you know. But some part of me does, right? Some kind of a way. Like, it's, you can't get away from it. It's impossible. And yet we have this guy Billy who's like, I'm married to this girl, it's fine. You're gonna give me a career, that sounds cool. You're gonna dress me like a fucking idiot, okay, right? Like, it's it flies in the face of everything we expect.
Well, it's just like weird because he like continues to wear it, like as they're on the train and stuff, and they're walking through the town.
Yeah. What's a jacket? It's cold.
I mean, yeah, but.
Well, the way Billy would spin it, and I believe, I'm almost certain the narrator points this out like really quickly though, at a couple points. This is how fate has dressed him. Do you know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
why would Billy?
Why would he try to change it?
Yeah, you can't change it, right? If you're Billy. Now here again, that is a super specific moment where we get to have that conversation again about whether or not fate is a real thing. But more importantly, if you really buy into fate, you got to really buy into it. Billy does. And he looks like an idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, like, it's coming up like more and more than what it did in the beginning. And I don't know if I'm just like looking more into it than what I should, but
Could
he
be.
keeps saying like and so on. Like he'll be describing something super specific, and then he'll just be like and so on.
He kind of glosses over details.
Yeah. Well, he's being like super descriptive, and then he just like switches and just like
Mhm.
and so on. Like I don't know.
I mean, I would need to have like a specific moment to like really, which I don't know. I mean, you can find one. Yeah, we can for sure look at it.
Well, I don't know if I'm just looking too far into it. I just
No. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But just because we're talking about it generally, generally speaking, I would say, you know, one reason he might be doing that is for the speed that he's after in the book, right? But also, and again, this is part of the conversation we're gonna have next time, so we can't quite have it. I think there are pretty defined reasons why the book is built the way that it is, like why he doesn't want us able to like get attached to the story in the way that we normally would, right? And I can't really say more than that until we finish the book.
More of a character study?
Huh?
Is it more like a character study instead of a story?
What do you mean by that?
Well, like I watched this movie called Licorice Pizza, and it wasn't really about the story. Like the story was kind of awful, but it was just about the characters. Like
Okay.
Jumping around in time.
I mean, kind of. It's not like that, because the what you're describing is what the filmmakers in that case would hope for, is that the characters are super interesting.
Yeah.
And we already know our main character isn't interesting. That's kind of his whole deal. Man, that's a really good question, actually. Here again, I don't know if we can talk about it a lot until you guys finish the book. I will say, I do think the narrator / Vonnegut wants to tell us a story. I do think that. And I do think it matters, at least to him, like he tells us so, right? What I would say is, again, this feels like a cop-out, but I think he tells it the way that he does for particular reasons. Like he has a goal in mind, and he attacks it, granted, in a way that we are super not used to, right? And part of that might feel like he's like, well, you could argue he's trying to highlight a character. He is doing that, but again, the difference in what you're describing is his main character sucks. Yeah. So, but again, we can for sure talk about that more next time. You're not wrong, but it's also super different from the whatever movie you're describing about awful pizza, licorice pizza.
Page 191.
Go for it.
What do you mean go for it?
Well, what? Just tell us what you're talking about.
Like, okay, so it's talking about Edgar, and then something about pregnant, I don't know, which is, I don't know, and so on.
Of all the summaries I've ever heard, that was like,
about.
I don't know what you're talking about.
This is one where it's like his letter to his wife. This is a bad example, but it's talking about the letter, and it just is like, there was an election at noon, and guess what? And so on. He doesn't bother to like go the rest of the
That was
Oh.
another one that I saw.
Well, in that case, that's because we know exactly what that letter is going to be. Do you know what I mean?
It's not worth really finishing, you know?
Yeah, which is kind of, I would argue, is the narrator's way of telling us that the letter doesn't matter. Right?
That's kind of what I take when he says and so on. It's just,
A lot of the time.
this information isn't important. I don't really care if you know it or not.
Yeah, well, and I want
That's
to.
weird because he gives us information that I feel like are just like throwaways. Like, why would
I
he say
see.
that?
Okay, so you're talking about Derby. Next to Lazaro was the poor old high school teacher Edgar Derby, mournfully pregnant with patriotism and middle age and imaginary wisdom and so on. We talk about that for a second. So I think it's similar. I think the way that we would use that phrase and so on, that's kind of anybody's way of like shrugging, of going, you get it. There's no point in me finishing, and there's really no point in you hearing more. You have enough information, right? Why do you think we do it with Derby there? Like, given what we say about him, I can read it again. Edgar Derby, he ends up getting elected as their leader by default. He's mournfully pregnant with patriotism and middle age and imaginary wisdom. What are we saying about that guy? The way we describe him. We know 3 things about him here, or technically 4, but what do you think the term mournfully pregnant even means?
He's full of
Oh, Jesus. Help that guy out behind you with it. No, but I know that's why you... Mournfully in this case means it's worth being mourned. He's not mourning, he's worth mourning. Because he's so pregnant with these things.
So he's filled with all these things.
He's so full. And again, pregnant, we understand what that means.
Yeah.
But this is not a use of that term you guys are used to. This more means he's so fucking full. Like, I don't know why I'm doing this. Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, when the one girl, like, that, he means along those lines. Like, he is so filled with these things that it's actually an issue. Okay?
But what do you
Mournfully.
mean by that? Like, filled with what? Like,
Well,
what
the
thing?
3, what was it?
It was patriotic.
Patriotism, I could just go to the book,
imaginary wisdom.
and middle age. That one's down the pike for me. Patriotism, middle age, and imaginary wisdom. He's filled with these things, too full of these things. I don't know if we can take them all on at once, but like any one of those terms, what do you think? What would it mean, or what would it look like to be too full of these qualifiers? Imaginary wisdom. That one feels kind of easy. What is that one about? He's telling us what about Derby?
He thinks he knows, but in reality he doesn't know.
He thinks he's got all this wisdom, but it's imaginary. If you're really, really full of imaginary wisdom, what an awful person you must be to be around, right? Yeah? So that's telling us a lot about Derby, okay? Middle age. Why does he bring that up here, do you think? This one's a little bit of a thinker, but I also think we could do it. He's full of middle age. So what? What do we know about Derby in relation to his age? Does anybody remember?
Was it too old to be here?
He was. But slow down. But he pulled some strings to get in. Which, he wants to do his duty, okay. But also, if he's too old to be there, and I don't know if you know this about aging, shit just kind of gets harder, man. It just gets harder. If you think you're tired now, you're not. I promise you're not. Why might that be a problem for him now? This is not a stumper. This is an easy one.
We're not going to be able to keep up with the younger guys.
You really want to be on your physical game when people are shooting at you, right? You don't want to blow a hammy, right? Yeah, you want to. Yeah, that's a problem given his environment. Okay. And the last one, even though I think in the book it's the first one, is kind of the trickiest one because it's like an idea. And it's also something I think, most of the time we consider to be a good thing, patriotism. And, roughly speaking, I think we know what that means. He says he's mournfully pregnant with it. He's overfilled with patriotism. So that apparently means it's a bad thing for him somehow. How do you think that might be? If we could try to tease that out a little bit.
Would be like borderline hubris, basically.
I think so. And again, you kind of get that in his letter. Consider this. His letter to, I believe it's his wife, is starting to sound, because we get one of those and so ons, is starting to sound like Derby's version of Weary's true war story. Right? It sounds like the beginning to that. Guess who got elected? I'm awesome. When we've seen the reality is nobody else wanted it, nobody gave a shit, so the British guys made him the leader. And nobody listens to him. Nobody cares. Who's he leading?
They say he's doing well and he's not doing
No, he's not. He cries when he gets syrup. If you gave your roommate a spoon of syrup and they started crying, you would be worried. Exactly. But he's so full of what he thinks he's supposed to be doing, given his patriotism, ignoring his middle age, which is the physical reality he's living in, and wisdom that he thinks he has. It's going to get him into trouble. This is not a spoiler, because he mentions it every time he mentions Derby. What happens to Derby? He gets shot. He tells us in the first chapter, Derby gets shot. That's why every time he comes up, poor old Edgar Derby, it's not going to go well for him. And he's kind of telling us here, a lot of it has to do with, again, not dissimilar from Weary. He's just full of ideas that are clouding his vision, having him not see what's actually going on around him. So I think that's also what the and so on is doing, is look, this guy, kind of dumb, you get it, we're going to move on. So even the narrator's kind of dismissing him. Did that?
Yeah.
Really long answer to your. Okay. Good questions. Other questions? Oh, yes.
I did kind of have an assumption that the reason why everybody ends up dying, whenever they say and blah 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 died, but then they say Billy survived. Every single time that somebody dies, they mention that Billy survived. Billy
Okay.
died. Is that because of him time traveling or so? Is that the reason why he couldn't die in that instance because he's not?
Here again, I would need do you have an example just so we can look at?
The plane crash.
Yeah.
I know it was whenever,
We'd have to find the page.
it was when believe it was when Derby got shot, or no, not Derby, sorry.
Derby?
Derby got shot.
Oh, well, they talk about that everywhere.
Yeah.
Um,
I know when the plane crashed or whatever, they said that everybody else, like, more in the beginning of the book, they said everybody else died, but Billy survived.
Yeah.
And they say it's so against, like,
And then chapter 7, they said everyone except for Billy and the co-pilot.
Yeah.
He survived. So they kind of like added the co-pilot this time. Chapter
Yeah,
7.
I'm looking for. I'm at 7 now.
First entirety chapter 7 is talking about the plane crash.
Yeah.
Very short chapter.
there's a lot of plane crashes.
Yeah, there's at least 2 I can think of.
Like, I'm trying to see if it connects with him time traveling, because he also mentions the year that he's supposed to die.
Yeah. No, yeah, we go future tense at one point. Like he gets assassinated, or he's gonna get assassinated
Yeah.
by Lazaro.
Yeah. Lazaro was talking about how it could be this many years from now.
Oh yeah, I have a question about that. So was it Lazaro who shot him, or was it somebody that Lazaro was like, hey, go shoot this guy?
No, yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
I think that's a weird. In Vonnegut's defense, he wrote a crazy book. That's the only thing in the book I ever latch onto where I'm like, I think he kind of screwed up. Because he, at one point says, Lazaro says, I'm going to send somebody, they're going to knock on your door, you know.
Yeah.
But then in the future, in Billy's future tense where he's going to get killed,
It's not.
it's Lazaro himself. Because the way he describes him. Huh?
He describes him?
Yeah, he says, Billy says something like, there's a man nearby, this man is very sick, this man, like you get the sense he's talking about Lazaro, because Lazaro is really screwed up. I always just chalk that up to Vonnegut losing one detail from his banana story. Because yeah, technically, according to Lazaro, he's supposed to send somebody to do it. You could also say Lazaro is kind of full of shit. To a degree. I mean, it's a small degree, because it's like, well, I'm not actually going to send somebody to kill you. I'm going to kill you myself. You know, but still.
Well, she also mentions that somebody was going to go to his house, and that's how he took it out, but it wasn't.
Yeah, so I'm saying, like,
Yeah.
we can actually, we can use this as a nice segue into talking about Lazaro. Because we don't always get to talk about the minor characters, and Lazaro is a bit of a minor character. The thing with the dog, we're not going to look at that page for a couple of reasons, mostly because I don't think anybody wants to, like, read that again. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then I firmly believe you have not read. But Lazaro recounts a story to Billy about a dog. The dog bites Lazaro. Lazaro, to get his revenge against the dog, puts a bunch of like metal and shit in a steak, and you get it. Okay. But like goes into detail about the dog's death in a way that's like, oh, you have problems. And then he caps all that off with, the sweetest thing in life is revenge. That's what he tells Billy. And of course, Billy is like, okay. Why is Lazaro even in this book? You know? There's enough death and awfulness. Why is Lazaro here, do you think? Huh? Oh.
To add on to the crazy people?
Well, I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But what kind of guy is Lazaro? Like, again, we don't know. We actually, to be fair to him, don't know a lot about him. But he's the sort of guy who would claim to have done that kind of thing to a dog. You see what I'm saying? We don't know if that story is true.
I mean, he thinks he's a badass. And
He
he's
does.
wonky.
The dog story was like unsolicited too. Like,
Yeah.
kinda asked.
Well, no one asked him. He ever murdered a dog horrifically? Yeah.
No one ain't say anything. He's like, hey, so it's one thing I did.
Yeah.
No one even segued into it or anything.
Yeah.
Is it Billy's like counterpart? Because Billy lets everything go. And
I can consider that. He for sure doesn't.
He's like, yeah, revenge and stuff.
And I've never considered that actually.
Dichotomy of someone who can't let stuff go.
I mean, look, so yeah, in some sense, for sure, he is the antithesis to Billy. Billy's always getting stepped on, you know, literally and figuratively. Lazaro, if you like cough on him, he's gonna try to like get you or whatever. So yeah. Well, it's interesting though. So if we use that structure, and I think it's a fair one. I'm honestly a little bit bummed I've never considered it. they're both so extreme, right? One conclusion I think you could pretty readily draw that neither one is like a good way to be. Lazaro is pretty clear. Like, we don't do anything he says he does. Don't do that. That's not a good way to exist, okay? But Billy as well, it seems like a shit existence Billy has, right? So on the one hand, it could be some kind of like they're more similar than we realize type of metaphor, right? Like they're so different, but in some ways they're actually pretty similar, if that makes sense. I also wonder, and this is actually what I wanted to think about with Lazaro. Somebody said this, I don't remember who it was. He wants to seem like a badass, or he wants to, right? You guys have never met anyone like this, right? You don't know anybody who really wants to seem like the toughest dude. You definitely never went to like middle school or something, right? You never. There's always these people. And again, hopefully they don't go so far as to like with the dog story, but a lot of the times, man, they got stories. They got weird, or you'll hear something about them, you know, and you're like, are you fucking kidding? And maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but that's not what matters for this discussion. What matters is they want that narrative, right? They want people to have a certain idea of them, a certain opinion of them. Lazaro is that kind of guy. We didn't talk about this in class, but I talked about it in a video, which I'm sure you didn't watch. In the poem Beauty, there's a character like this. Does anybody know who I'm talking about? That's how I know you didn't watch the video. Perhaps didn't read the poem. There's a guy named Bobby Sudduth who claims to, and I'm quoting here. It would not be fair to put this on an evaluation. He says, "Fucked my own sister, bud, and I tell you what, it wasn't bad." That's also unsolicited, right? But he says it because he wants the speaker in that poem to have this idea of him, that he's such like an overly sexual, like fucking animal, right? He'll just anybody, right? Like that's kind of
syphilis is no big deal, something like that.
Yeah, and I think Lazaro is similar. Like at one point, the narrator says he has rabies. Lazaro does, which is a metaphor. He didn't really have rabies, but also he's an animal, right? That's what he wants people to think of him. We have a phrase for this, which I actually purposefully avoid in class, but I think it applies actually to characters like this. So I'll just put it out there. What kind of masculinity does Lazaro exhibit? There you go. It's 2022, we all know that stupid phrase. Yeah, but it applies to him, and I think it comes down to everything out of his mouth. At one point he says something like, "If you fuck with me, I'm gonna fuck with you." Like he talks by pointing. That's how he exists. But it's all about performance. It's all about having people make assumptions about you. But then the problem is you have to kind of live up to that narrative. According to Billy anyway, he ends up killing him. Bobby Sudduth, does anybody know how he ends up in that poem that you all read? He shoots himself in the chest with a shotgun. So yeah. Anyway, I think that's why Lazaro is in here as well. He's like the opposite of Billy, but in a way that we're used to, actually. Like we see all the time. So that's interesting. All right. What time is it, by the way? I have no clock.
11:36.
Okay. All right, this next one, we don't have to go to the page. I think we can do this by memory. If you want to look at it, it's on 193 in the big book. But again, I think we can do it by memory. When the soldiers, the U.S. soldiers, get to Dresden, they run across people, like German people. And a surgeon gets really upset with Billy. Does anyone remember this? Why? Why is he upset?
He was kind of making like, he thought he was making a joke out of like the army or whatever.
Yes. Why is he offended by that, do you think? No, but I'm saying like, because he says, like, this is a joke to you or something. But my question is, why does that bother him?
Well, he was a veteran of both world wars, so
Yeah.
he has personal, like, stake in
Why?
how people treat it.
Talk to me like I'm stupid.
Well, if he took part in it, then you think he would hold it in a very high regard.
Yeah.
If he kind of sees someone coming in making a joke out of it,
Yeah.
you know, I shed blood for this.
So what you're saying, and I want to make sure I don't have it wrong, is he defines himself, this German guy, at least in part, according to his like veteran status and whatever idea he has of war. And for this guy to make a joke of it is in some ways making a joke of him, right? I would agree with that. Also consider that if you were in Germany in the 40s, you were involved in war no matter what. It was kind of on your doorstep. I mean, they're in Dresden here in a couple weeks. We're gonna bomb the shit out of it. So even if he wasn't a veteran, he would still be involved, right? It would be at the front of his mind. Yeah. I also kind of wonder, who is Billy to him other than like a clown? You know, he sees Billy and everybody else walking in. Who are these people to him? Again, I'm not trying to stump you. This is easier than you think. Who are these people? What does he know about them?
They're Americans.
So they're obviously
Bad guy to them.
enemies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially for the kind of guy it sounds like he is, with his wartime experience and what he must think, you know, given what he tells us. If your enemy is walking around dressed the way Billy is dressed, why might you take offense to that? What is it? Because this is a question we don't usually consider. Why might you want your enemy to look cool, or at the very least not look like a moron?
That's the person that's killing your guys.
Yeah. Don't you, like as a soldier or whatever, kind of define yourself according to your enemy? If they all look like jackasses, like, oh great, we're the people that are at war with the jackasses. Like yeah, and it reflects on you. I just thought that was interesting. Okay. I'm trying to move kind of quick because you guys actually asked questions I didn't think you would, which is totally fine. But now we gotta like. All right, the last thing I want to talk about, I told you we would, so we have to do this. This is on 202. This is in chapter 7. 202 in the big book. God help you find it in the small book. It's really close to the end of chapter 7. It's I hate to call it this, but it's the shower scene. Anyway, Billy and I believe Derby and Gluck is the guy's name. Yeah, they're in Dresden, but they're in the slaughterhouse now. Like we're steamrolling to the end of the book, and they get sent out to get food for the prisoners. Okay, and they get lost because they're idiots. And then this happens. They walk in on a bunch of young women POWs. And this is how it's described. They are those girls with all their private parts bare for anybody to see. And there in the doorway were Gluck and Derby and Pilgrim, the childish soldier and the poor old high school teacher and the clown in his toga and silver shoes staring. The girls screamed. They covered themselves with their hands and turned their backs and so on, and made themselves utterly beautiful. Now look, pretty much all of that, to a degree, is what we would expect to happen, you know? But it's the last part, to me, that is odd. Made themselves utterly beautiful. Like, for instance, I don't know if you've ever seen a movie, maybe on the internet, where somebody finds somebody else in the shower. We're not going to go further into that. But like there's expectations, like salacious ones that come up. There's a word for you, salacious, that come up in that setting. And in that setting, the narrator, if this was a very different book, might say, and they were beautiful. Like, look at those hot women. That's not what's going on, right? He says they made themselves utterly beautiful. So it's an action they're performing. And that's an important difference. So my possibly hard question, and I apologize, is how do they make themselves beautiful in this moment? What do they do you think? You may want to reread because they do a thing. I'm telling you, they do something that for the narrator makes them beautiful. He does not say they are beautiful. He says they make themselves beautiful. So it's an action they perform.
They cover themselves.
They cover themselves and they scream and they, again, probably do any and everything you would do if somebody walked in on you in the shower. What the fuck? You know, like we would all do it. Why? Why wouldn't you, for instance, because nobody wants to be walked in on the shower, but why wouldn't you say, somebody pulls back the curtain, you're like, hey man, come on, right? Like why would it be more dramatic than that, do you think?
Because you're embarrassed.
Why?
Unexpected.
For sure that. But so what? We get surprised all the time, right? You don't normally lose your mind when you get surprised. So, I mean, we can start with embarrassed. Why?
Is it that word? Is it vulnerability? You know what I'm
Vulnerability.
Yeah, is it that? Because, like,
You tell me?
I mean, you feel like uncovered because you're obviously naked in the shower. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like, but you can see every bit part of me.
You are.
Is
Go
it
ahead.
that and then like the masculinity? Because these guys have been at war. They don't really see.
Well, I mean, we can't really know what the young women here think, right? Although you could contend, I don't know how much they think like these are like grizzled veterans because Billy's with them, and like most of you'd be like, what the hell is that, right? But your first part is dead on. Like you're vulnerable, you're defenseless, in again, literally and figuratively. So what do? Like anyone, they would cover it. This is what I was saying much earlier. This is a human moment, okay? It's what anybody would do. Man, woman, even if you're in great shape and you're like, look at it. No, you wouldn't do that. No one would do that.
It's a reflex.
A human reflex. Again, if a dog's in the shower, it'd be cute, but like he wouldn't go, ah, like, because he's a dog. But again, just like he talks about Lot's wife, I think just like he's trying to sort of talk about Derby with the spoon, these are human moments where humans do things that humans do. And it all comes back to fragility, to vulnerability. It kind of gets announced in those moments, if you notice, each and every one. Don't look back. Well, I have to. And it's kind of telling you she has to, not because, again, the typical reading, but the reading the narrator gives us is she misses those people in those places in her life. Like she's announcing to us in that action, this stuff matters to her. It hurts her to lose it. It's vulnerability. Derby cries. It's vulnerability. Same thing here. Everybody in the story, the few moments we get that are like human moments that the narrator underscores like this, time and time again, it's being fragile, it's being vulnerable. And he wants us to see it, like with all these different characters. But I want to draw your attention to it here because he does it linguistically. Made themselves beautiful, not they are beautiful. Outstanding. All right. Before we move on, and boy do we need to, any other questions or thoughts or anything we talked about? Great. All right. Oh, I'm scared to see what's coming next. We're probably all right. All right. I sent you guys an email before class. Open it. It's nothing exciting. You know, it's not like one of you has a code to a brand new scooter. There's no kind of like. All right. What we're looking at as the TV fires up, I suppose I should give you a preface first. I have graded your papers. And before you scurry off to turn it in to find your grade, I have not released the grades yet, so don't worry about it. I'm going to release them after class is over, so don't worry about it, okay? It's going to be all right. I'm going to tell you a couple things. I understand as a student, as soon as I say I've graded your papers, 50% of you take a nosedive emotionally. It's okay. Before we say anything else today, and before you see your grades, I want you to know you can revise. You don't have to, and some of you will take me up on that, but you for sure can. If you scroll down to the bottom of Turn It In, there's a revision drop box. There's a date listed on the syllabus when your revision is due, and I believe it is the 23rd, okay? So like a week from tomorrow. If you want to revise, when you get your paper, when you get your feedback, you can. The other thing I want you to know, the way I do revision, because every teacher is a little bit different, I'm a firm believer in whatever work you give me is the work you've given me. So like you'll have teachers who will average your new grade with your old grade. That feels really shitty to me. If you get a better grade, I just replace it. If you get a worse grade, which occasionally happens and bums everybody out involved, I keep your better grade. So there's no like really losing doing this, okay? The other thing I'll say, on average, when people revise in my classes, they'll do about 5 points better, okay? Now that's not nothing, it's half a letter grade, but those are usually, they have the paper, and again, I do understand it, but they have the paper and like, they make some changes. I'm not saying they don't work on it. By the way, if you don't work on it, you'll get the same fucking grade. But they do about 5 points better, is all I can really say. There are other people who really take it on, maybe rewrite whole paragraphs, what have you. This is not hyperbole. Every semester, I'll have a student do 10 points better. Occasionally, again, I'm not lying to you, I've had students do like 20 points better. It happens. So whatever your grade is, if it's not your favorite, and statistically, that's going to be the case for some of you, you can fix it. You can. Okay? All right. Before we do all that, I wanted to have a little bit of a conversation about the papers. I wanted to do like one more workshop. So this is what we got. These are 2 body paragraphs. These are from 2 different students, by the way. They did write about the same poem. That was not intentional on my part, but these are 2 different papers. So we're going to take them in turn. All I want you to do, to begin with, I guess first of all we should review, and this might hurt me, 3 parts of a body paragraph. What are those? We remember those, right? They're 3 eyes, okay. Illustrate is the second one. What does any of this mean? What does any of this mean? How does a body paragraph start? What do you start a body paragraph? Topic sentence. All right, let's talk about that for a second. What is a topic sentence? Kind of has to do 2 things.
Make a claim.
It needs to be an argument. It needs to make a claim. And what else? Huh?
Main idea.
The main idea of the body paragraph. The other way you could describe it, if your thesis is supposed to be an argument, hopefully, but also the main idea of your paper, the topic sentence, the very first sentence of every body paragraph is like a thesis for that paragraph. You can approach it in a similar way, okay? That's number 1. Number 2 is illustrate. What does that mean? Evidence. Specific textual evidence. And look, our first paper we wrote about poems, so most of the time your evidence is going to be what? Quotations. You're going to quote lines. Good. You don't want it to be super long, and you guys generally did a good job with that actually. But you also want context for your quotations. You want to cite it, obviously. And then last but not least is what? Interpret. That's your argument. You use the evidence, and this is something we're going to talk about today. You use the evidence to prove whatever argument you might have. And look, we say this all the time in different kinds of ways. You don't always know what your argument is to start with. That's all right, but you do need to figure it out at some point. Sometimes you got to write a little bit to figure it out. You got to cut stuff that doesn't work. You'll see what I'm saying here in a minute. But the point is, every body paragraph, topic sentence, needs to be a claim, needs to be your main idea. Then your evidence with some context. And then the rest of your paragraph needs to be you walking me through your thoughts to prove whatever it is you're trying to prove when you figure that out, hopefully. So what I want you to do, example 1, first, read over it. Do we have the parts? Which we do. We do have the parts. But more importantly, are they doing what they need to do, these parts? Take a minute, we'll talk about it. Oh, they're talking about little boy, by the way. I should have said that here. Sorry. I need more time. Outstanding. All right. To begin with, and this might have been a PDF, so it'll be weird, but I'm going to break it up. That's our topic sentence. This is our evidence, obviously, because it's a quotation. That's our analysis. Okay. Topic sentence. To begin with, keeping his son's innocence alive was important to the father. This begs an obvious question. What is the obvious question once you read that sentence? Huh? Why what?
I need a little bit more detail.
Why is it important to the father?
Yes.
Good. Yeah. Why is it? Anybody have like a guess on that, or? We kind of get to that at the end, right? We could potentially do that. That could potentially be our argument. Needs to show up in the topic sentence. It's not there. It's not there. That's an issue. And by the way, I'm walking you through it this way. If all you care about is your grade, and I know that's how most of you feel, it's okay. Topic sentences are worth a couple points. You get a couple points back doing this stuff. All right. Evidence. We do have it, right? It's this business. Okay. I don't know if we need all this context. It feels like a little bit much. I mean, we could probably, well, nope, not doing that because it's not helping me. There we go. We can do that. Also, to be totally fair, he doesn't ask him if he ever saw those guys play. He asks him like if he ever saw them play. And again, that's an important distinction. You just want to be accurate. But either way, this is what matters, right? This guy. So my question is, we have our analysis. Do we use the quotation? And I say it that way purposefully. Do we make use of this quotation? What do you guys think?
Maybe not in the direction they were trying to.
What do you mean by that?
There probably could have been a more precise quotation for the topic sentence.
Well, we could ask this in a different way. Like, here, we can scroll down a little bit. If you don't have access to the quotation, do they lose anything from the argument they've made? That's my way of saying, do they need that quotation to make this argument? They don't. They don't. So one of two things needs to happen. Either we come up with an argument using that quotation, which we could do, or we find a different quotation. This happens sometimes. Sometimes you have an idea, and I think they had one just like going in, okay? And you pick a quotation that you think might work, you don't know, and it doesn't. And you just kind of make the argument you were always going to make. You can really see it in a lot of smaller paragraphs. Smaller paragraphs, a lot of the time, one of the reasons will be this. You thought something about the poem, you pulled evidence, because I don't know, we talked about it in class, and then you just say the same thing you were always going to say. I'm not going to ask you guys to use your memory to think of lines that could work for this protection business. Frankly, I don't know if I can do that right now, so don't worry about it. But, just for the sake of this exercise, I kind of want to, for a second, think about the quotation. And we need line breaks, so that sucks. But when you quote, and I know I've said this, why do you quote? Quote for what?
An analysis on.
Yeah. You don't quote for ideas, you quote for what? Language. Understand, if you directly quote someone, the only real reason you're doing that, at least in this setting, is so I can see the language. If you're quoting for an idea, if you're quoting for information, well, then you can paraphrase. There's no reason to quote, you understand? So if you quote, and I think you should, we got to look at the language. Why we dropped the bomb on those 2 towns in Japan? His face goes all wooden. The eyes freezing like rabbits in headlights. Is there any language in there we could dig into? Potentially.
Freezing like rabbits. Or freezing like rabbits.
That would be a pretty good option. There's one other one. We talked about it. What happened?
The word we, is this we?
You gotta, this is right here.
Oh, sorry, we, like, something.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. That's a good one. I was thinking about something else. That is a legit option. Yeah? Yeah? I was busy thinking about this one. So there's at least 3. There's at least 3 pretty significant pieces of language in this quotation. We don't talk about any of them. That's a problem. Okay? And again, it is either you need a different quotation, which is possible. Okay? Or we should work with this one. And in this case, we got 3 things we could really dig into. We probably can't dig into all of those, so at the very least, the quotation should be shorter. Right? Now look, in class we talked about we talked about towns. Let's talk about this for a second, because we only touched on this, I think, in class. Freezing like rabbits in headlights, what's the deal with that? What's going on with his dad right here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think because you have that really nice image. I don't know if you've ever run down a rabbit, but like you could see it, right? Where I was like, oh fuck, like that kind of. But what is that also? And I know it's been a minute, but we talked about this. If you are a rabbit in headlights, you're pretty what? Yeah. But I'll let the rabbit out of the bag. Who's in control of the situation?
Not the rabbit.
Not the rabbit. Yes. And again, this ties into larger themes in the poem, right? We're talking about power now. And that's weird in this moment because it's like a 6-year-old talking to his dad. Dad's got all the power, supposedly. But something about this question, you could start to argue, takes that power away. And I'm not saying the kid has it, although that would be an interesting argument. But at the very least, Dad doesn't either. And now we got to think about, if we're thinking about the beginning here, keeping his son innocent, protecting that is important. Well, why is it important? Well, because that's what you're supposed to do. Okay, that's one argument we could make if we found better evidence. Another possible reason, and this is how argument works, there's going to be different reasons. Another reason is he wants to keep his son innocent. He wants to protect him because he doesn't want him to know what adult life is, right? and how small they are. Again, we talked about this in class. You would get there with the quotation. Whatever you do, whatever poem you work with, whatever you quote, use the quotation, use the language. I'm trying to do this kind of quick. Let's go to the second exam. Same deal. This is a different paper, different student, same poem. We're looking for the 3 elements. We're trying to think about how good a job they did. So take a minute. This one's trickier to break up for reasons that I would hope are kind of obvious, right? But a couple things. And look, I might sound like an asshole. I am not trying to be, okay? But I'm trying to stress a couple things that are important to you. Number one, never do this. Do not do that. I would tell you, and I think I did, one really good rule of thumb is, especially in papers of the length that we're writing, don't quote in the introduction anyway. You don't have room, right? And you're kind of telling on yourself here because you're saying, you know that thing I already quoted? Well, I'm going to talk about it now. I was like, well, why did you bring it up before? You were going to talk about it then. So don't do it. Don't put it in the introduction. Put it in the paragraph, and that will help you avoid things like this. Don't direct me around the paper. Don't direct me around the book. In chapter 3, in the second paragraph, like, you guys do goofy shit like that sometimes. Don't do that. I don't need a map to the book. Like, just tell me, what are we looking at? What are we talking about? Anyway, if we cut that, because it could actually help us sort of pinpoint some things. Right? Like, that's something to do with that is our argument. The destruction of childhood innocence is exposed. Again, they're telling it, I mean, I can kind of live with that, but anyway, something about the destruction of innocence is what we're going to talk about. All right, cool. The other thing I would tell you not to do, and I don't know why you guys do this. This is not just a this student thing. Plenty of people do this. It drives me up the wall. These ellipses. What are we doing? What are we doing? Does somebody teach you to do this? Don't listen to that person ever again.
It's my level of one teacher.
Who?
She said I was quoting from like a.
Okay, but who?
Oh God, I don't remember her name. Her last name was Jet. She told me whenever I quote and I don't take the first part of the sentence and just like a single part to have ellipses in it.
It's possible you misunderstood her. It's possible. She's also a little bit my boss. The reason you don't do that, God. I'm glad that's on video now. So I'm like, what bitch? So if you're quoting words, I don't know why that's the sentence that came to mind, okay? But that's a sentence. That's a complete sentence. Subject, what the subject is doing, and then we qualify it. All right. If you wanted to quote the entire thing, that's how you would do it, right? We'd have our citation out here, period. We'd have our context. Okay. If you wanted to, for instance, the way this sentence is built, you don't need to quote the. That's not significant. The. You'd lose it, right? Well, now we don't have the whole sentence. We understand that we've chopped something off. right? D is still not worth quoting. We can do it ourselves. The point I'm making is we understand, because of how this works, that that's not the whole sentence. Do you follow me? I can't. I should stop talking because I shouldn't record this. You have no reason to give an ellipsis there. The only reason you would put an ellipsis in a quotation, because you don't do it at the end either, is if for some reason you cut the middle out, but you're still quoting. And I mean, you see it here. That sentence doesn't make any fucking sense now, right? Stewart said dog salty, and you're like, what is wrong with Stewart? But you're telling me that you cut some language because you wanted to, because you felt like we didn't need it, and you're trying to get to this language. Okay, you put in brackets to show that it's your ellipsis, to show that you've edited it. Okay? Never, ever do you need an ellipsis at the beginning or the end of a quotation. Ugh. All right. But that's like fundamental. Ugh. Anyway, all right. Really bums me out. Where were we? Oh. All right. So we have the quotation now, which we've already said is a good one, and then we have, seemingly a lot of analysis. Of course, we provide another quotation with those fucking ellipses right there. Also, that guy goes out there. All right. These are good lines. These are good lines. We talked about them in class a little bit, so great. If you could try to sort of summarize our analysis of those lines, how would you do that? What are we saying about them? We're saying something about innocence, right? What are we saying about it?
Where the kid compares the Icelands to the planets.
Yeah.
It makes you go, like, they're not comparable, but to the kid, because his world's so small and he has
Right.
to really live, he feels like those things are like super comparable, because to him, the planets are big and the Icelands are really big.
Yeah, and they're just super distant, like he says, and things he doesn't know. He kind of ties the idea of distance to the idea of his ignorance. If something is super far away metaphorically from your mind, you don't know about it. See what I'm saying? But all we really say is that he's naive, which is not inaccurate. He is. He is. My question is that worth proving? We've talked about banal claims a little bit. It's not. We know he is. We know he is first 3 or 4 lines in the poem, right? Like, he's a kid. He's dumb. Like, get it. So again, one of two things can happen. If all you really have, kind of at the end of the day, at the end of a paragraph, and this is a bummer, but it happens, is a banal claim, if you can't get any more out of that, you might need to lose it. Like, sometimes it doesn't work. It happens. The other option, most banal claims, I'll say at least 90% of the time, start from a good place. This one does. The issue is we don't go far enough, okay? There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, I mean, we get a lot of like pretty decent mileage out of towns, and that stuff's pretty good. We bring up another, I'm gonna say banger line here at the end, but we say nothing about it, right? That's nothing. And again, I know why. It's because we're at the end of the paragraph, so like, we're done. One of two things can happen here. You could lose this, right? Talk more about towns. You could do that. You could make this its own paragraph that's like related to this one. That's possible, you know? But at the very least, we gotta say more. We gotta say something else. Because all we said up here, even though it's a lot, I mean, if you translated all that, we're really just saying that the kid is dumb, right? He doesn't know their cities. What an idiot. Like, that's kind of what we're saying. Well, let's push on that a little bit. I know we're almost out of time, but we got time for this. He doesn't know, like we do, that they're cities, that they're not towns. He also doesn't know that that's an important distinction. Why is that an important distinction in this context? Do you think? In what sense? What really important sense in this context? Way more people. Look, if they bombed 2 towns, I don't know that we would study it in school. Honestly. 70 people died. You're like, I mean, it was a world war. I'm sure it sucked for those people, but like, But they're like thousands. You're like, oh shit. Cities? And again, the kid doesn't know any of that. He doesn't know that a bunch of people died, right? All that is, again, it's part of that distance, like planets. He doesn't know this stuff, separate from him. So on some level, maybe, again, we're getting back into that territory of what he doesn't know and what his father wants him not to know. Could be one avenue we could go down. Another potential avenue with planets, they say a thing, these places have no material bearing on the boy, which is true. We talked about this in class. Saturn, unless you're one of those goofy people that's into astrology, has no bearing on your life. So you don't think about it. It doesn't matter to you. Saipan doesn't matter to him. That says, I think, a really interesting thing about innocence that we didn't talk about in class. And I'm going to spend the next couple minutes trying to have you figure it out. If you're so innocent, you don't know about a thing, okay? Because it doesn't matter to you, because it doesn't affect your life. Well, what are we saying about either innocence or knowledge and how it works? What are we saying about, like, why we learn things? We're making some kind of an argument here. Why do you learn anything, do you think?
To make yourself more aware as you go through life.
Yeah, just the sort of knowledge for its own sake, in a way. Yeah.
It's like relative in some type of form.
It's what now?
It's relative, like there's some way that it's relative to your life.
Oh, you mean relevant?
Huh?
You mean relevant?
Yeah, relevant.
Okay. I heard relative.
No, relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what we're getting at. We're kind of arguing the kid hasn't learned these things, and we don't learn things like it if it's not relevant to us. So aren't we kind of saying the way knowledge works in this poem, it's pretty selfish? It's pretty like short-sighted? Like, tell me about that shit when it affects me, type of thing, right? Well, now we're saying something really interesting about the bombs. Because look, we learn about it because it's history and you got to go to school. How much do you think about it, really? How much do you know about it, really? Some of you might know, but like 90% of the population, nothing. And I'm not bagging on you for that. I'm not. It's just, it's got nothing to do with us in our day-to-day lives. We don't give a shit. You couldn't phrase it that way, but that's the argument you could make based on those lines if you had more room. Okay? So last thing I want to say to you, then we'll let you go. I guess first, I want to remind you of what's coming up. And then I'm going to say a thing and then you can go because I see you're in your fire drill mode. Vonnegut, we're going to finish it for next class. It's chapters 8 to 10. I have no idea how many pages that is. I think you can do it. Do it over the weekend. We'll have a really weird conversation on Tuesday. Revision, 9:23 by midnight. Again, you don't have your papers yet. As soon as you all leave, I will bring it up. I will release it to you. So you wait like 5 minutes. You should be able to pull it up. You're going to have your grade, which is what you're going to look at. You're going to have a rubric, which I don't know how your screen's a little different from mine, but there's like a Tetris looking guy. You click on that, it should bring up a rubric, okay? You will also have vocal feedback, which is me talking at you about your paper. So listen to it. And of course, if you have questions, thoughts, concerns, whatever about your paper, we can talk about it. We can. It's part of my job. The only other thing I'll tell you, I have a 24-hour rule, okay? Some of you will actually be really happy with your grade. Some of you won't. Whatever the case, either end of the spectrum you're on, I feel like we can have a more constructive conversation if you give it 24 hours. So that's all I ask. Anyway, let's do the 23rd. I recommend everybody do it. You don't have to. Lastly, as a reminder, if you revise, or even if you don't, by the way, because this doesn't go away, language. Dig into language. If you're going to quote especially. That's all I got. I'll see you next week. Thank you guys.